Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of So Much More Than Stardust. My name is Wakas, and I'm your host today. I apologize for my absence for a few weeks. I have been traveling, and a couple of my guests got the podcast nerves and decided not to talk or share their stories, and I respect that. Anyways, this was what was on my mind today. Have you ever wished you had a superpower? Some special ability that you could use and make things better? As kids, we read comic books and thought about being Superman or Wonder Woman, the Human Torch or the Hulk, or being invisible or be able to teleport. These would be incredible and unique. No one I know can do these things. But let me tell you about this superpower we all have and we don't use. Are you interested? The power I'm talking about is presence, the ability to connect to a human being or a situation and be completely and absolutely present, just to be able to listen and to observe, to be there for someone or something, to participate. Ask someone you know who is in pain, how are you? Just sit and listen when they share. It is so much more meaningful when you give your time to someone without expecting anything in return. Time is the most precious thing we have. So let's share it with someone. It will make things better for them and for you, I promise. This is my conversation with John Covelli, a friend, a musician, and a human being that I find really interesting. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Thank you so much for being on our podcast, So Much More Than Stardust. I thank you for your time and your willingness to share. I haven't recorded a podcast in at least a month or more. And this is the first time that I've gone through a dry spell. And mostly it's because, I asked a few people that I sort of thought would be willing to share. And they said yes. And then I got the setup going. They were like, I am too shy. I don't really want to do that. And I understand that. And, obviously, in order to share your story, you have to be a little, willing. And I'm not, I'm just trying to get people to share their stories when they feel able and willing. So I thank you for doing that. What a beautiful day outside.
It's gorgeous. This is my favorite time of the year.
You were saying that.
Yes.
If somebody asked me, I would always say fall because, one, time of transition, that does something for me. And the colors are beautiful, especially around these parts. Tell me why this is...
Well, I enjoy autumn also, but for many, many years, because of my career in retail, autumn is when depression would set in for me. And I realized much later in life that it was because fall meant that the Christmas holiday hours at my retail job were coming. And that career, which spanned quite a while for me, was a great source of, I felt like I wasn't good at retail and I was stuck in retail. And so in the fall, I would start to feel like, oh my God, 12-hour days, 7-day weeks is coming and I'm going to be bummed out. And it was a weird discovery to make, but I made the discovery, and then I started feeling better in autumn, to the point where now I enjoy autumn. But spring has always been my favorite part of the year.
So I'm not familiar with your career in retail. What were you doing?
Well, I started retail as a clerk in a record store.
Okay.
And I was very much afraid of answering the phone, not being able to answer questions that I was asked, making change at the register and doing it wrong, upsetting customers that had unreasonable demands. You name it. Like retail was a spike for my anxiety for many years, and I had jobs in retail for about 10 years. Of young adulthood. So
were you young when you started?
I was college age, and for about a 2-year period where I quit the record store because my rock band was traveling and really we were really into ourselves. So working a job was beneath me. And then when the band broke up, I went back into record store retail, and that progressed me through my retail career until I finally got out. So it took me up into my 30s.
So hopefully there are some listeners to this podcast who don't actually know what a record store is.
They have them now again, but they didn't for a long time. Yeah.
But, I remember, I spent, as you and I were talking earlier, I spent a lot of time in Chicago. And, the Jazz Mart, which is a big record store, and, I'm a true record store. And for jazz aficionados, if you want, some obscure recording by Yusuf Lateef or, anybody like that, that was the place to go. And then Tower Records obviously was this big behemoth thing. Yeah. So, did you work for a big record store? Or?
So this was sort of late 80s and the tail end of the primetime record store history of St. Louis, but you had Peaches Records and you had Streetside Records, and I worked for Streetside. Vintage Vinyl was the used record store that I knew of in town. So I think the 70s was probably the heyday for St. Louis record stores. And then, like I said, I went to work in the late 80s. And I literally, when that brief time that I left because of the band activities, that was in 88 that I temporarily, left Streetside Records. And CDs had started.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's not going to last.
Yeah.
And then when I went back into that career 2 years later, most of the records were gone and CDs were everywhere. And I was like, wait, how did that happen?
So I think you and I are from the same generation. And if you really think about it, we've gone through a transition which a lot of generations have not gone through. So we went from listening to music only on radio to vinyl records, to cassette tapes and 8-tracks, to CDs. And now, I don't even own any music. I just subscribe to streaming services. So, in our short lifespan, so people always complain, oh, life is too short. How many changes have we gone through? Do you have a favorite medium? Nothing beats live. I will say that.
Well, that's funny. I've moved my record collection around 12 times. Every time I moved, I had to move my record collection, and still have half my records that I've had since I was a kid and been collecting since then. I love playing records, and I also play CDs and I do streaming as well. For me, listening to music now is it happens at different times of the day. I'm not a regular listener. I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so, a record does require, the way we have it set up in our house currently is that it requires to be in one place for the duration of that record. Mm-hmm. And we're actually getting a system fairly soon that has Bluetooth. And so we'll be able to play a record and be all around the house and out on the patio and all that stuff.
Nice.
But yeah, I would say records are my my passion. And, since I was a little kid, I wanted to make a record. And, I've been doing that this last year, and learning about how a vinyl record is made is like amazing. But yeah, I would say records, working in the record store was great, but seeing that change, literally like a time capsule type change, 2 years later, and seeing hardly any records in the record store was quite a shock. And
it was a shock. Yeah. I subscribe to that notion as well. If you wouldn't mind, can we just backtrack in our conversation a little bit? And so, when you describe your dealing with customers in the record store and finding out a truth about who were you as a person, right? You were young and not. I can speak for myself, but I wasn't that self-aware. I did not know what things I held precious, what things meant something to me, and what were my strengths, what were my weaknesses, and what was I supposed to work towards, right? So for you, were you aware that you had this kind of social anxiety before you opted for that retail career, or did you find out once you'd opted for it and there were reasons for you to stay in that job? And so I would like to know a little more about that.
Sure, I can tell you about that. I will say that having anxiety and knowing that you have anxiety are two different things. And at least in my career as someone with anxiety, I suffered from anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder and attention deficit disorder all through my life, but I did not know I had those things. And so going to the record store, going to work at the record store, I was hired because I had extensive music knowledge. At the age of 19, I was listening to music at 4. So 15 years of soaking up all kinds of music. I mean, my mom and dad played all sorts of music in the house. And so and then I went through high school listening to music, all different kinds, and then going off to college and hearing, in the dorm room, doing the share in dorm room life, and you're listening to even more times. So going to work at a record store was like, well, I have product knowledge. And that's what brought me into that career. But then the phone ringing, the cash register, the crowded store, the lights flashing, the noise of music playing and trying to do tasks, completely overwhelming, but I didn't know I had anxiety. I just knew I was really afraid to go to work. And I did not identify these mental issues until later in life. I was probably 30-something years old when I went to a therapist and learned that I had anxiety and probably had depression in college and all these things I wasn't aware of. I didn't know what self-talk was or, inner dialogue. I hadn't heard of those things, but I had it all my life. So I just thought that's how life was, and which also contributes to a certain amount of pain and, So
it's interesting that you use the term internal dialogue. And I have always used the term internal monologue. So I find that interesting because for me, it's always this voice that's, going on in my head. And sometimes it was my parents' voice, sometimes it was society's voice or, whoever. But, it was somebody telling me whatever I was doing was not the right thing to do. Or, are you sure you'll be able to do that? Introducing doubts. If you ask Mick Jagger, it's... probably Lucifer speaking to us, but I'm not really sure. But did you actually experience like a dialogue, pros and cons going on in your head?
Yes.
Yeah.
So for me, it was always multiple John Covellis in my head. One criticizing me, the other defending me, and another saying, "You guys, shut up! Like I can't even get work done." So yeah, multiple voices, but all my own. So when I first heard sort of a loose diagnosis of schizophrenia, I was relieved because they're all my voices.
Yeah,
they're all me.
So did you see that animated movie that they'd come out with where there was this person and there was like an audio room that Paul is sitting in, and there are like 4 different people in there. So it was kind of
what
like
was that called? That was a wonderful.
It was a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
I forget the name of it too.
I'm forgetting it too.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Were your parents musicians?
Well, my father loved music, but grew up very poor and was not ever exposed to like a musical instrument program. He wanted to play drums and wasn't allowed to. That was just it. But loved music, so he played records all the time. My mother was sang and played piano. And so we had a piano in our house, and because she was required to take piano lessons as a child, so were we. So that was that. We had two parents that loved music and wanted their children to at least learn it. So
did you grow up in St. Louis?
Peoria, Illinois.
Peoria, Illinois.
Yeah.
You know, I just talked to Raj a couple of episomes ago, and Raj grew up in Peoria as well.
Oh, no. I'll have to check out that episode.
Yeah.
Okay.
Were you a big family? Yeah, you talk about other brothers and
two
sisters.
children.
Yeah.
I have an older brother. He's 3.5 years older than me.
Yeah. Is he into music as well?
He loves music as well, plays violin, bass, guitar. He's very active in his church music program, and you know, he was the one that brought rock and roll home from college.
You remember the first?
Yeah, it was frightening. Led Zeppelin and Rolling Stones music coming out of these huge speakers that he brought home from college, and I was just frightened because that was not what I was listening to as an 8th grader, freshman, or I guess it was. I was in 8th grade, freshman year of high school, when he came home from his first college break, bringing his stereo and these records, and I was just like, I can't stand
this. Is too much.
This is too much. Yeah, exactly.
So do you think that the whole sensory input and the volume, sheer volume, had something to do with it, or was it the content that you were hearing?
That's a good question, because I think the content, in some ways, you know, the jazz music that I was listening to did have electric bass and drums and keyboards and things in it. So probably not the content as much as the use of those instruments in more dissonant ways, and then the volume probably, and then the size of the speakers. I think looking at a speaker that big, hearing the song Black Dog by Led Zeppelin, and hearing the beginning of Jimmy Page's guitar solo, which is very low and guttural and loud and honking and sounds like a machine that needs tuning up, and then it goes into it. You know, I mean, that was just kind of really unnerving for me. And of course, my friends, my new high school friends who had already listened to that music, thought I was kind of less than. And so that became another voice inside me. A new John Covelli popped up at that time of my life, which was, you are less than all these people, because you are obviously not able to deal with these things that other people are. And that was like another beginning for me, was new music that I grew to love, but was very intimidated by the social aspect of how I was ingesting that new music.
So you were going to school in Peoria?
I went to high school in Peoria, and then when I graduated, discovered Webster University here in St. Louis that had a jazz music program where I did not have to take the math, science, English courses, but instead I could go right into the course of study. So I chose to come here to go to Webster.
So was that a thing at other places where you had to take hard sciences in order to study music?
Well, yeah. I had also been looking at some state schools, and all of the schools I had looked at were, going to be repeat, the classes that I had taken in senior year of high school. I was going to have to, you take a lot of basic stuff again. And that idea, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't really want to do that. I was afraid to go to college. My friend and I smoked some pot and went to a college night where we walked up and down these rows and rows of tables and people talking about their colleges. And literally, I heard a voice say, "Hey, kid, are you a musician?" And I turned over there and walked over to him, and he was a college rep from Webster University.
How about that?
Yeah, and I said, "Well, yeah, I am a musician." And he said, "Oh, really? You don't play jazz, do you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I would like to study jazz in college." And he said, "Well, at Webster University, you can go right into that program and not have to take math, science, and English." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
What are the odds?
It was absolutely bizarre that this happened, but I had a witness. My friend Mike was with me, and we were both just like, Can you believe this is happening?
So did you ever go back and, did you run into that guy
I
ever
tracked
again?
him down.
Yeah, so he was real.
He was real in 2007. So how many years later was that? 30? No, 10, 20 some years later, I saw this guy in a newspaper article. I saw his face, and I looked him up, and I found him, and I said, "Were you a college rep for Webster?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "All the people I know right now in my life, I owe this all to you. Thank you very much for finding me in that crowd of lost people that night in Peoria, Illinois, because I was lost. I had no idea what I was going to do about college."
So the reason I asked you if you were able to see him again was because there is an extraordinary climber from Australia. He's an alpinist, and his name is Reinhold Messner. And Reinhold Messner is well known for making solo ascents of all the the biggest mountains in the world. The Everest and K2 and Nanga Parbat and all of those. And he made all of those ascents solo without oxygen. And when he writes his memoirs and he lectures, he's on the lecture tour and tells a story. And he always talks about the second man. He talks about when he was making his ascents, he always felt as if there was a presence with him that was guiding him and helping him. And I actually just started a book which is called The Third Man, which is about two people who are, either doing an Arctic expedition or something, and they have the sense of another person helping them. So I thought maybe, that person might have been your second man, but, he turned out to be real.
He turned out to be real, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So coming down to St. Louis and starting in Webster, well, first of all, let me ask you this. Unusual, at least, for me to think about. I have an interest in jazz. I developed an interest in jazz starting out with rock and roll, or maybe, pop, and then going through rock and roll, and then, taking a left turn at blues, and then arriving at jazz, after listening to some live blues and going like, yeah, that's not strictly blues, and there's a little bit of improvisation, and then learning that, there's actually a whole genre of music that is either improvisational or takes liberties with more formed music that we used to get listened to. So for you being a young adult or an adolescent and having a well-developed interest in jazz is not typical, is it?
I am not sure if you could say typical. So that was back in the 1970s when I was in third grade and I started playing trombone.
Yeah.
I am not sure that the kids of today have that same model because now jazz is more prevalent in music education at an earlier age. However, I, at that age, 9 or 10, I guess, had grown up listening to pop music on the radio, music, which had a lot of jazzy influences and lots of classical music that had a lot of exposition in their musical ideas. They're developed and lots of exploratory happening with instruments in the orchestra. So I was playing out of a music book in my room. I was playing a song from Cabaret, and my parents knocked at the door and said, "Are you reading that melody or making that up?" And I didn't know what they meant, but I had been taking liberty with the melody of the song, and they thought that was notable, and I didn't know what I was doing, but ad liberando is the Italian music term for ad lib or jamming or jazz or whatever you want to call it.
At liberty, yeah.
At liberty.
Yeah.
So I was improvising from the very beginning of me playing the trombone. So I think I must have heard it in music and wanted to emulate it for an earlier age, from an early age, I guess is how I'd say that.
Why the trombone, may I ask?
Sure. So this is another funny thing because no one had ever asked me this question until someone I met in a meeting. He asked the same question. I love jazz. You love jazz. Why'd you pick the trombone? And I'll never forget the moment that I picked it because I was laying in bed one night, staring at the ceiling as a 8-year-old, 7-year-old, and the thought came into my head. And I've since identified that as from my higher power because I wouldn't have had that idea myself. And so I think it came to me as a result of God or my higher power in my life. And no one had asked me that until a year ago. And so that explanation came out of my mouth, which is that my higher power just probably telling me to be honest in the moment. And so now I'm reciting that because that's my story and I'm going to stick to it.
Sounds good to me. That could be your second man moment, right? That is where the...
Right. Someone told me to pick trombone. It wasn't the best decision I've ever made in my life. It's always been kind of a decision that I wrestled with a lot, but I picked it and that's my instrument.
Tell me why you wrestled with the decision.
Well, throughout my musical career, I've had a lot of feelings of less than, and that's based on, when you look around at the jazz musicians who are working a lot, they're being asked a lot, they're in demand. They're called all the time. I need you on this gig. They know they're good because if you're being called all the time, you must be good. So here I am, an adult at this point, not really being asked, not really being called upon to play. And so I thought, well, it's either because I'm no good or it's because I play trombone and everybody likes the saxophone. So because that's the saxophone and then trumpet, those are probably the two most popular instruments. It's what you hear mostly in pop music and the Saturday Night Live solo as a saxophonist. I mean, jazz saxophone is classic. And so I thought, well, it was either a stupid decision or I'm not any good at it. Either way, I suck. So I literally was playing on a gig. It was right before COVID, and it was during our jazz residency that we had at the last hotel. And I was on break, and I was telling parts of this story to my friend Jesse, the piano player, that night. And he said, yeah, man, you just picked the wrong instrument. And I thought, okay, well, he either means that I'm good at it, I just picked the wrong instrument, and that's why I don't ever get called to play. I thought, yeah, maybe that's the truth. So I don't know. It's been one of those things that I've wrestled with.
I mean, trombone is one of the horns, and, big band music and, marching bands use it. And, we've all heard that. But, if you look at classical music, and, I listen to some classical music, and there's, not a whole lot of, pieces written for trombone. I mean, they might be written, I've listened to a few, but not anything like, the cello or the violins or, even the other horns. But, so, I guess, you're kind of lucky that, your higher power didn't mention the bassoon to you at some point in time. That would have been...
Well, yeah, higher power should have said you should pick trombone, but just know it's not, you're going to have to find your own path.
And you have.
And
because
I have.
I know that you dabble in or you play the Hammond organ as well.
I do.
Tell us a little bit about the Hammond organ itself and your decision to play it.
Well, so in the band that I had mentioned earlier that I was in the late 80s, band felt the need to add keyboards. And at the time, I myself and another guy were the horn section. I played trombone and he played saxophone. And they actually auditioned a guy to play keyboards in the band, and he was this really flashy soloist and had all these synthesizer sounds that were, really fancy sounding, and it wasn't really what the rest of the band was looking for. And I said, well, maybe you should have me play keyboards because I can play a little bit of piano. And sometimes all you need is just another texture. You don't really need somebody wailing around with both their hands when you already have two guitars, a bass, and drums. There's already a lot of sound on the stage. So maybe you just need a little something. And so they let me try it. And that's when the guys in the band started playing records for me and saying, well, we love the Meters. We love the Allman Brothers. We like these bands that have this Hammond organ sound. And I had heard that sound, but never really identified it. I didn't understand the physics of the Leslie speaker. I did not understand the electronics and physics of a Hammond organ. So I got full all into it and learned, about Art Neville, Greg Allman, Booker T. Jones, these organists that made that Hammond organ sound so amazing to hear that. It's an unmistakable sound. And so that's how I kind of fell into that. And to this day, I play keyboards and trombone with the Grooveliner. And once again, I'm really just adding a little texture when the music needs it. And thankfully I'm not a great soloist on the keyboard, so I'm not going to take these big long solos with lots of notes because I just can't play like that.
Yeah.
I'm mostly a one-handed player, and I'm got my trombone in the other hand and sometimes playing them both at the same time.
I've seen some of your videos on YouTube, and you sometimes post on Facebook. By the way, I'm a big Allman Brothers fan, and I know it's in the spirit, and also Neville Brothers. I think they're an extremely talented family, the Neville Brothers, and one of their brothers has done some seminal work on the trumpet as well, hasn't he?
I know that. Charles played saxophone. I think he passed away.
Right?
They might have. I mean, it's a big family, and I don't know them all, but
but beautiful.
There could
music.
be, really, really talented family for sure.
Yeah. So your first band was a rock and roll band.
That's right. The Unconscious. We were pretty popular in the music scene here in St. Louis and in the Midwest. We traveled around, and we're kind of funky rock, horns, keyboard, really syncopated rhythms. It was really, really a neat alternative for the other popular bands in town. You could hear all those bands by walking around the Landing. Laclede's Landing was a really happening place there in 88, 89, 90. You could go into 5 different bars and hear 5 different bands all in one night. And it was really an incredible music scene. We were playing a great percentage of our music was original music. And then we also did covers, but in an original way. So songs that were written by other people and recorded by others, but we put our brand on it and rearranged them. It was a lot of fun. It took us all around the country, and but then broke up.
Were you in college when you had to be, right? Because you were here at Webster, and then you started doing this. So did you take time off of college to tour?
No, I just dropped out.
So you just dropped out. So you didn't finish your degree in music?
So I finished my bachelor's degree.
Okay.
I was in a band called Blank Space with some of the guys like Dave Simon and Mike Aperion were in Blank Space. Mike Aperion went off and formed the Unconscious, which then I joined later.
Okay.
But I finished my bachelor's and was working on my master's degree at Webster.
Also in music?
Also in music. I was the graduate assistant and was working on my master's degree. And in year 2, only a couple of credit hours short of finishing, I decided to drop out just because I think I was probably afraid of finishing.
Yeah.
And the band was, we were partying a lot and living in a building together, and I didn't need any of this schooling anymore. I wasn't going to teach school ever in my life, and had just decided that being a rock star was really within our grasp, and I needed to focus on that.
So, this question really comes from a place of ignorance. when you go to school for music and you're pursuing, a bachelor's and then a master's degree and perhaps a doctorate, I know a few composers of contemporary classical music who have gone that route. And, if you really look at it, I'll put it in perspective, a lot of people like Beethoven and Mozart and all, they kind of went through graduate school too. It wasn't formalized school, but, so am I correct? Because you hear about, let's say Berklee School of Music, and I think that's more geared towards performing and, so how much of music school is about performing and mastering an instrument, and how much of it is focused on composition and so on and so forth, if you could help us with that.
Well, in my day, it might have changed since then, but in my day, there were sort of three paths.
Okay.
The teaching path, the composition path, or the performance path. And I was a performance major. I went, most of my classmates were probably a mixture of performance and education or performance. So you could be doing all of those. The compositional student, I could usually tell because they might not have been as active in the ensemble work, the playing with others work, as they were in learning a lot of instruments and then spending a lot of time composing. But we were all taking the same classes and kind of doing all the same thing. But most of the performance majors were in the practice rooms practicing their main instrument a lot. I wasn't. I was out in the smoking lounge a lot, just kind of afraid to go into my practice room and just rather socialize and smoke cigarettes with the others and then put off my studies. But most of the time you could spot the person that was practicing their instrument in the practice room for many hours a day was usually the performance major. The education major, they had to learn all the instruments or as many of the different instruments as they could. So, you could just kind of look around and see who was doing what.
It is, and I know, so some of my musician friends, if they hear this, they'll kind of look at me with an arched eyebrow. But so, music theory gets a bad name, for a lot of musicians, especially, when you're first starting out and you pick up the guitar and don't worry about the music theory. Learn these three chords, and you learn these strum patterns, and you'll be able to do. But do you find? And we both know, and I think anybody who's knowledgeable to a degree about jazz music understands that jazz musicians, more than any other popular form of music, are probably the most well versed in music theory and adding the fancy little notes at the end and taking progressions, what. So that with your interest in jazz starting out and then going to school, that probably rooted you firmly in music theory and how it helps in popular music, or at least,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There are certain reasons why some music sounds a certain way. And it's just like a recipe in a cake. You have these components, and the reason why it tastes so good is because of these certain combinations, and those are just simply put, those are rules. And, rules are, that word sounds negative. When you're a 20-something-year-old and someone's forcing a bunch of music theory rules down your throat, you're like, I don't need to know this stuff. I just want to play what I think sounds great. But if you want to understand why it sounds great, you can then explore the makeup, the chemistry behind the sound is all music theory. And I was one of those people who resisted learning music theory. I didn't think I needed to do it. I had this, I played by ear. Everybody said, wow, you could just pick that song up. I just hummed it one time.
That's
And
amazing.
you could sing it right back to me. And I'm like, yeah, so what do I need music theory class for? I think I'll just sit outside and smoke,
Yeah.
And, but then later in life, I realized, God, I wish I would have been paying more attention in theory class. Because now I want to understand when I hear something and it sounds really neat, or it sounds not like it sounds disturbing.
Yeah.
I kind of want to understand why.
Yeah.
I want to know what's making it sound like that. Is it a dissonant interval? Is it some kind of rhythmic aspect that's causing weird vibrations in my heart? What is going on there?
So the bands that you play in currently, how do you guys come up with the music? Is it mostly by committee, or one of the instrumentalists thinks up of a melody and then you figure out, because I was at the symphony a few weeks ago, and they had a young female composer from Chicago. And one of the things that she said, which struck me, and I've always wondered about it, and she was like, when I'm given a commission, I can figure out a melody pretty quickly. I can pick it out on the piano. I know where I want it to go. She goes like, the real bitch is the orchestration, because that takes me the longest time, and that is what I struggle with the most. And even when I present the final version, I'll still talk to the conductor and go like, I had a couple of 3 ideas here, and so how does that work for bands like yours?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Right now I play in. I have 3 main projects right now. In the Groove Liner, it's a group effort. My jazz group is more like I kind of say what we're gonna play, but then I want the guys in the band to collaborate and take liberty with it, but I'm kind of directing things. And then in the third group, which is
what's your jazz band called?
Hard Bop Messengers.
Okay, yeah.
And that was a band I put together a few years ago to basically play hard bop classics, Horace Silver mostly, late 50s, early 60s Horace Silver tunes. And then the Groove Liner is more of a rock, funk, soul band. And then the third group is it's called Ska Masala, which is Tommy Halloran taking his swing originals, and we're playing it in a ska format, which is really, really exciting and cool. So these 3 bands, we all have our different method. As I said, in the jazz group, I'm dictating pretty much, this is the music that I would like to play. Let's do it. The album I had them record was all my compositions, and that was the very first time that I had done anything like that. So that was completely out of my comfort zone, and I was, I did all of the arranging and all of the writing of the music. With the Groove Liner, I really had to kind of grow up and be an adult in that band, because I had the most music training of all the band members, and so I kind of at first saw it as an opportunity maybe for me to bring in demos where I had done all the instruments myself and then say, play this. And that did not work with these guys. So with that band, the way it works is one guy comes up with a riff and another guy adds something here. And then, I add some horn lines or collaborate with the other horn players on a horn line. Sometimes I'll write the horn arrangements out. I'll give everybody like 3 choices and see if they like one of those 3 to be the thing we go with. And if they don't like it, I'll say, well, what part of it didn't you like? I can make any adjustments. Did you like a combination of A and B, or did you like B and C? So I've really learned to sort of be a team player, and what that's helped me do is look at music arranging and composition as like a math problem. Like, give me the problem, I'll solve it in a few different ways. You can choose. If you don't like any of them, I'll go back to the table and come up with some new ideas, because it's not me personally. I've learned that it's not me personally that they are not liking. It's just it doesn't sound good to them.
Yeah, that's one of the 4 promises, right? Never take anything personally, which has been very key in my recovery. So your group, one of your groups just came out, recently released an album, right?
So my jazz group, we have been releasing some music. We had a holiday song that we released digitally. We have two new releases at the end of April coming out. And then in June is the album coming.
Oh, very cool.
So that's what I'm most...
And the title of the album is?
It's called Hardbop Messengers Live at the Last Hotel.
Oh, okay. So this is has resulted from your residency at the Last Hotel, which is just down the street from where I live. But I never lucked out enough because, when I've discovered where it was, first of all, I thought this was some kind of innuendo. When you would say Hardbop Messengers at the Last Hotel on your Facebook post, I didn't even know where the Last Hotel was. And then one of my friends came to visit, and I put him up, and I found out it was just down the street from me. But unfortunately, COVID had hit by that time, and you guys weren't performing anymore.
That's right.
You also perform at Evangeline's Bistro.
Yes,
and
we did our New Year's Eve show at Evangeline's.
Yeah, and then there are a couple of other places around town where you guys...
I do my trio at the Cigar Inn in Belleville, and the Dark Room is sort of the jazz center of Uptown. I've had a few things there, and that's a happening scene.
And then you performed at the Grove, a couple of venues at in the Grove.
In various groups. I played at the Atomic Cowboy and the Ready Room. I've kind of played all over town, and all that's changed with COVID. There's been a lot of places that didn't survive the pandemic, unfortunately. Yeah. And now there's new places to play.
Of course. There always will be, hopefully. Right. I've listened to your band once, and it was before I knew you, and you guys were performing. It was part of like either a parade or an event, and you guys were playing outside the Schlafly Tap Room, I think it was.
Oh,
and I just remarked walking by and going like, man, that band sounds different from
what you're... That must have been the groove liner.
Yeah. It was horns. And, it was the horns that caught my attention.
Oh,
and I remember just standing there and listening to, until you finished the set, which was maybe another 10, 15 minutes. I was like, I got to remember what these people are called and, maybe listen to them somewhere and then, like
fun.
Other things. I was still, smoking a lot of weed at that time. So maybe that's why you guys sounded good.
Maybe.
Yeah. But, you and I both know each other, through recovery. And, when two people in recovery sit together, it'd be really hard for them not to talk about your recovery.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your journey. I'm interested. I have... we met each other through this meeting, at Lindell Club. Mm-hmm. And... there are certain people that you're instantly attracted to, and you were one of those people. I always saw a very kind, very loving soul and, a gentleness about you that, I aspire to. And, I don't know if I'll ever get there, but, that is what I saw in you. So, but I didn't really, I haven't really heard you, give a lead or what have you. So I'm not really very familiar with your story. And if you'd like to share some of that with me, how, it came about and how you got on this path, et cetera.
Well, sure. And let me say that when I met you in that room, I was always admiring what you were sharing. And isn't that how the program is? I wanted what you had.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And that's how it was for me. As soon as I came into the rooms, I immediately wanted I got a general sense of what everybody had, generally speaking, and I wanted it. It didn't mean that everybody that I met had what I wanted. But so in sobriety, I've learned that it's the whole, it's the group. If I single out one person and study them for a while, I might be disappointed.
Disillusioned.
They're human.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm lucky that when I came into the program, I bought into it and have been in it ever since without any going back out. My story is like most other people's stories. I wasn't doing anything with my drinking and using drugs that everybody else wasn't doing.
Right, and that's sometimes the justification we, give ourselves.
Exactly.
But would you agree with me? And please feel free to say that you don't. But, what I have found, especially when I look at myself in my usage pattern, I feel that one, lack of that self-awareness and, a dereliction of the duty of care that we owe to ourselves was, part of it because, hey, everybody else is doing it. I might as well get on the wagon, right? And then the second part of it was I was dealing probably with a lot of, performance anxiety, just, self-esteem issues and so on and so forth. And, they seemed to go away when I had a drink, so what have you. So I don't really know how much of that played into your story, but I think a lot of us who end up in the rooms that we have sort of, deal with those issues that unfortunately didn't go diagnosed or weren't identified or we were not smart enough to know about them.
Right. The first time I was up on stage playing music in a way where there was focus on me, I was frightened and couldn't wait to do it again.
Really?
And that's kind of how I went. In high school, I started smoking pot and doing that before rehearsals because, I didn't know the because. Yeah. Looking back, I know why. That, I was feeling less than the other people in the room, and I thought that would make me better.
Yeah.
And then I would realize it made me worse, and then I would say I'd never do it again, and then the next time I would do it again.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember I used to be friends with a guy who used to play the drums, and he loved to smoke pot, or at least he learned to love to smoke pot. And I remember in either introducing himself or smoking with him one time, and music always sounded so great when I was smoking pot, but I would think so I automatically thought that it would make you play better, right?
Sure.
And he smoked and he went and performed or practiced and stuff, and he was like, man, I'm not going to smoke weed anymore before I play. And I was like, why? And he goes like, because it throws my timing off. And he goes like, and it makes my playing worse. And I was like, how is that even possible? I remember he was working on the drum solo from Dire Straits' Money for Nothing, which has that iconic, drum intro. And he was like, man, I had it figured out, and now I can't play it anymore because, I tried playing it. So, it's kind of interesting that we did that. But
right.
So I find it interesting, but I identify with the fact that we were talking about, doing this podcast, and you said, well, Kas, I got to tell you, I have the worst case of stage fright. And I was like, but you're a performing musician. You go like two different things, Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that, about how, somebody who is afraid of that attention and yet craves it, and the battle that goes on.
It is a battle. It is very much a contradictory thing that I understand so much better in sobriety now. And I wish I would have known what was going on. But I remember reading about the Beatles and then thinking, well, the way to unlock my creativity is to smoke pot. And as soon as I learned how to smoke pot, I wanted to do that all the time. And
right.
And then that took my time up, so I didn't have time to create
right.
as much as I thought I was going to, because I was too busy looking for illegal drugs to buy, which takes up a lot of time.
Yeah.
Later in life, I just felt like it was part of the gig was, drinking and smoking pot. Before, during, and after was part of it.
Right.
And like I said, I wasn't doing anything that nobody else was doing. Everybody was doing the same thing. It's just as I got older and later in life and started taking on more responsibilities like a job and then a wife and then children, most of the people that I saw around me were doing less and less and less and less of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I was, but I didn't want to be doing less and less. So I was kind of conforming to that, but kind of thinking that was an unreasonable expectation when I went out to play music, which none of our friends were musicians. So I was the only musician. And so I thought, well, then at least I have license to do it when I'm playing music, And that became the rub. So, I would go out to play a gig and know that I'd probably be better at this if I didn't use drugs and drink, but yet by the end of the night I had and didn't understand that when you have an intention of not doing something and then not being able to not do it, if that made sense, that's a problem.
Yeah.
I had every intention of not drinking, yet I came home drunk.
Yeah.
Why? How?
Yeah. How does that happen, right?
Yeah. That's a problem. That's a drinking problem. That's unmanageability.
So that affected your music and your performing negatively, in your mind at least, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I would be doing knee drops on stage and jumping around, and everybody thought it was fun and loving it. And then the next day I would be like, do I owe anybody an apology? Because I really don't remember the last set.
Right.
That's kind of an unmanageable situation. I never really did do anything like take my clothes off on stage or do anything that I regretted doing, but I probably could have.
Well, brother, I am not a performing musician, and I have.
And you have.
Yeah.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
So, there was a period of time where I was banned from all reggae bars in Chicago. I don't know what it is about reggae music. Once that
the
beat
bass,
starts playing, the clothes automatically start to come off.
Yeah.
Anyways, so. Good time was had by all, but where are you today?
Yeah, today is
other than being here in the studio.
Yeah, well, today I'm in the studio,
Yeah.
Which thank you so much for having me.
Of course, it's
I'm
my
honored
pleasure.
That you asked, and today I'm looking at this album coming out in June and thinking, boy, what a trip that has been. Something I never would have really thought I would do, but always wanted to do. I've been, as I told you before, I've been the type to think about something over and over and over before I get the nerve to try it. And this was one of those things. I finally was inspired, though, to write this music. And because of the pandemic and the ending of our 6-month residency, it was my wife who quickly motivated me to not sulk, but to do something about it. And I started writing music that reminded me of the hotel.
Oh, okay.
And I within 6 or 7 months, I had probably 70% of an album written musically, and then I met a vocalist, and we hit it off. And I started writing lyrics and realized that I had a whole album of a story about a hotel. And that's when I started making plans to record it. After, our 2-day session and I had all 11 songs recorded, then I wanted people to hear it. So I thought, well, the only way we're going to do that is if we put it out into the world. And of course, vinyl is something we talked about. I love vinyl. So, that has a process. That's a, manufacturing process and it's expensive. So I thought, well, if I'm going to spend that kind of money, it better sound good and better be, the recording was what it was, but then there's ways to enhance the recording by mixing and mastering. So after we mixed and mastered it, I thought, well, I have to start sharing this with people to see if it's any good. And that was really when I crossed over that line of being, I'm frightened to share this with a person, but if I don't, I can't go forward. And so this is where I relied on my program and my higher power to figure out what to do. And I shared it for a person who loved it, and she's a radio promoter, a jazz radio station promoter. And that was really the first time that I shared it with someone in the industry, and she thought it was a great album. And I thought, okay, well, I don't think she's lying to me. I could probably tell myself she's just saying that. She really doesn't mean it. Or I could just move forward, and I decided to move forward. So I'm making these decisions with the help of my higher power and the people in the rooms in the program, because I'm telling them, I'm sharing with these people in the program how I feel, and then getting feedback that's kind of telling me to keep moving forward, and that's what I've done. I have an album coming out. I just can't believe it. The art design, the getting everybody to do these different jobs when they really have other jobs to do. It's just been an incredible experience.
So I can't wait for the release. I hope there's a party, and I hope I'm invited to it. But
could I mention the date?
Yes,
because I have a date for that party.
Oh, absolutely.
It will be August 19th.
Yes.
So save the date.
I will save the
Okay.
date.
Here in St. Louis. Then in Chicago, it will be up. I know you're.
Yeah.
So the 20th. In Chicago, and then the 21st in Peoria, my hometown.
Oh, how about that? How exciting!
3 nights of celebrating the album.
That would be
3
fantastic.
different cities. Yeah, very excited.
I just wanted to put this out there. I think human beings have this creative impulse, and I think making sounds that are not words has to be one of the more primitive creative efforts or impulses that human beings have. And from the time when our ancestors used to dance around fire and made percussive sounds against whatever it was they used, to the time when music got formalized and developed a written language and was able to be performed, for good or for bad, only a few of the musicians seem, that are popular or successful bands seem to be able to do it as a full-time profession. While a lot of the more creative people or who are going their own way, we don't have kings and nobles and, counts, et cetera, anymore. So, a lot of these people have to be subsidized, musicians, creators, by society, and have to be subsidized in a way that is, again, that doesn't have a formal path. But, this is to my friends, if you're out and people who are creating music, support them. Go out and listen to them. Go to the places where they're performing. If they put out a music endeavor, then make sure that you support them by buying, their music and, telling other people about it, because that is how we as a society support, creative arts. And it doesn't just go for musicians. I'm actually hoping to talk to Chris Day, who is lucky enough to be a professor of fine art now. He just sent me something saying, hey, I've been promoted to professor. But he does art, and, he used to go to art fairs, and that's how I got to know him. So art nourishes the soul of society. And the way that we become a more fulfilled society is by nurturing our artists and our creatives, because God knows there isn't enough, formal work for them out there.
Right.
Am I correct in saying that?
For sure.
Has that been your experience as well?
Oh, for sure. There's always been more creativity in my mind and music for me to make than there was opportunity to share it with other people. There's a shortage of places to play and a shortage of people coming out to listen.
Yeah.
And it has been like that for decades.
Right. And these past 2 years in the pandemic didn't do us any favors either.
I think it shifted stuff around.
Yeah.
People turned to virtual experiences.
Yes.
But there's no there's no substitute for a sound. A sound is something that you can't disprove. We were talking last night about, I asked our dinner guests last night, were you one of those kids that could put your 2 hands together like this and blow lightly and it would sound like a low flute sound?
Right, yes.
And one person said, yeah, I could do that.
Yeah.
And the rest of us were like, no, I could never do that. I always appreciated that person that could do that.
Yes.
Then there was the guy that would put his hand under his armpit and make that kind of sound. I couldn't do that. And honestly, the guy that could got a lot of laughs.
Oh, yeah.
So you couldn't disprove that the making of a sound will make people react.
Right.
And sometimes, you can't explain the sound, but you react to it, you know. And music is where I chose to make sounds in. And what was fascinating to me is last weekend, some of my compositions from The Last Hotel, the Live at the Last Hotel album, were choreographed and performed in a modern dance piece at Wash U at the Edison Theater. And
Congratulations! That's a big deal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was incredible to see my sound.
Yes.
On stage with movement, and the goal is to do the whole album with the jazz sextet on the stage. But we started with just 2 selections. Cecil Slaughter, the head of WashU dance department, choreographed. They had an entire spring show, and so this was just a small slice of it. But I was listed as a guest composer, and I was just ecstatic. And I went both nights just to see if the whole show was the same both nights or if there were differences. And I certainly learned more about dance, modern dance, and both nights, seeing how things were different and noticing the things I noticed. But, the truth of it is that there's music and that there's movement, and together that's dance.
Yes.
And that you can't disprove.
No.
And so once again, I'm blown away by art. Art is something you just can't argue with. I mean, you can talk about it and you can make arguments about the meaning, but you can't argue that it's there. It is there. And it's there to hear and see and feel and all these things.
When we get sober, we realize how lucky we are, right? How lucky we are that we can still speak and that we can still see and that
Right.
we can still hear.
Oh, right. Where's my shirt? Still be alive.
Yeah, grateful I'm not dead, right?
Right.
And not only that, but the theme of my podcast, and I usually do a little intro to the podcast at the end of the conversation, and I'll do that. But for some reason, presence, being present, has been in my mind, and. Of all the things that I can be deprived of, liberty obviously is a big thing, your freedom to do as you choose. But if I, for some reason, wouldn't be able to look at beautiful things and hear beautiful things and see, form and motion, and, one of the things that I do when I come here to record podcasts is I go over and look at the people who are practicing aerial ballet, and because it's next door, and I can look in through the windows, and that is just a beautiful thing to watch and see. I think the human body is beautiful. I think the human voice is beautiful, and I think it is just amazing that people create stuff without any thought about what it's going to bring them. They just create it out of this impulse and need to create. And then they're generous enough to share it with those of us who are not fortunate enough to be creative. So I appreciate, what art and music and dance and just creativity of people brings to my life, because it enriches my life and my experience as a human being. And I thank you for that, and I thank you for the effort that you have put into it. I wish you all the luck with your upcoming album release.
Thank you.
And I will make sure that I have a copy of it. And I would love to, watch the whole experience with the dance and all of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me here, and talking together has been really exciting.
I appreciate your time and your willingness to be here.
Absolutely.
I love you like a brother.
Love you too, man.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay.